Good afternoon or good day, depending on which part of the world or time zone you are. Welcome to the third in the series of seminars, now webinar to celebrate Nigeria's National Day anniversary, the 61st this year. I am Fola Shoboyejo, Executive Director of the Shoboyejo Turning Point Charity Foundation. In collaboration with the Association of Nigerians in Lethbridge and the Southern Alberta Ethnic Association, you are welcome to this seminar. For some, there may not be information or awareness of the activities of the Shoboyejo Foundation. Our mission is simple: to promote and work on educational development and community development. To this end, with the grace of God and the support of people from especially Lethbridge churches and in different parts of the world, we have support. Even in Nigeria, we have completed the reconstruction of a school, the Hodgson School in Ifo local government of Ogun State, Nigeria. 3 classrooms, a computer laboratory, toilet building, all with ceramic flooring and aluminum roofing. We have also done 2 seminars in the past. One on immigration and global migration from history to now and going to the future. We also held a seminar in 2019 on the topic of development and democracy. Borrowed from the developed countries, will the model work in developing countries? So this is the third one. We didn't have one last year due to COVID, and we hope you will enjoy it. And for the future, our project is a women and youth center to promote after-school activities instead of kids running into trouble, running around the village and having conflicts with their parents. We are dreaming of a youth and women center where women too can acquire skills in literacy, crafts, and work with the kids on painting, drawing, sculpting, weaving, braiding, fashion designing, haircuts, crafts and welding, small crafts items, and woodwork. And because of the connection of Ogun town to the Adubi War in the 20s, about a century ago, whereby when the war theater was very hot and the conflict was very devastating, the people that escaped from that conflict found refuge in Ogun town. And from our knowledge, based on our knowledge and available information to us, Adubi, the freedom fighter who led the struggle, is remembered in books and stories about the war, Adubi War, but he has not been memorialized. There's no cenotaph to his memory and things like that. So we have space in the lot after developing the Women and Youth Center to have Adubi Heroes Museum built in the place. We also have plans for internet radio where children can express themselves and people can interact on the internet, radio, and learn and teach, and do have all kind of information, local and so forth, about commodities, market days, and local sports and things like that. That is our dream for the future. And even now, before we formally launch the project, we have, contributions already coming in. So this is an opportunity for partnership and for support. Thank you and welcome to the third in the series of our webinars and seminars. And the title is Fake News, Disinformation, Belief Systems, and Truth. Perspectives on navigating a polarized world for peace, development, and happiness. We will have fun today because we are very great speakers. Thank you and welcome.
So our next speaker is Kris Hodgson. Kris has a solid media background that includes 9 years instructing courses in the digital communications, media, and multimedia production diploma programs. He has spent a total of 20 years in the media industry, 5 years in economic development, and 3 years in community capacity building, encouraging renewable energy adoption. Kris Hodgson is fascinated with 360-degree virtual reality journalism for the potential it holds. In his spare time, he plays a handcrafted electric cello, and he enjoys competing in runs and triathlons. Please welcome Kris Hodgson. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. And it's so good to see all of you today. It's been a great afternoon listening to all these different speeches talking about this very important topic. So yeah, like was mentioned in my introduction, I've been teaching journalism for the last, this is my 10th year of teaching at Lethbridge College. And it's been a lot of fun, seen a lot of evolution in the media industry in that time. My background, I did an undergrad degree, so a 4-year communications degree. And then after that, I worked for weekly newspapers. So I was working on Vancouver Island, in Parksville and Qualicum Beach. And then I moved to another newspaper. I was working up in Westlock. And then I was there for a few years. And just what a switch from Vancouver Island to the cold northern Alberta. It was a lot of fun. In every community, being a reporter, I would be writing about 10 to 20 stories every week. So interviewing a lot of people. I would also be taking all the photos to go with my stories. So it was a very busy time, but it was very rewarding. And it was great because you felt like you had a really good sense of what was going on in the community. And each community I worked for is about 10 to 15,000 people in these small communities. And so I would be living in the hockey rinks over the winter months, and in the summer, I'd be going to a whole variety of whatever was going on in the community. So from sports to motor vehicle accidents to city council to court and everything else that happens in a community, I was covering it. And again, it was very fulfilling work. So from Parksville, Qualicum Beach on Vancouver Island, yes, I moved to Westlock. Then I moved to Athabasca, another community even further north. And then after working at that newspaper, I worked at Beaumont and Devon newspapers. And in that time, yeah, again, a lot of great people I got to meet in those communities, and it was a lot of fun. After that, I switched gears into economic development. So I was working on trying to attract renewable energy companies to Southern Alberta here. And I was working both in Lethbridge and Leduc and Nisku. And then a job came up at the college, and I was very excited because I thought, hey, I love journalism so much. What greater way than to meet with a lot of young people and educate them about the importance of not only thinking critically about the information we consume, but also how to create that information and how to really think about getting a really good balance of information, make sure you have no bias that you're putting into your stories, that you're getting a really good balance and going from there. So that's a quick snapshot of my background, and it's been a lot of fun at Lethbridge College ever since. So yeah, I teach in the Digital Communications and Media program. It's a 2-year diploma program. And that means that in the first year, it's a lot of like getting the fundamentals of how to gather that information, how to research and compile that. And in the second year, it gets more hands-on as we go. So each semester kind of scaffolds and builds upon each one, where the students are then creating content for Lethbridge Campus Media. And you see in the bottom right corner of the slide, Lethbridge Campus Media is our website where we have all the students share their stories. So whether that is for print and online, whether it's for the radio station that we have a television station, and we also have been working on 360-degree journalism. And I did my master's in that work. And just if you think about virtual reality and putting on those goggles, it's thinking about what the news would be like and experiencing that with the news all around you. So I did some work with my master's in that area, as well as I followed it up with some applied research at the college. And that's been really interesting just to see how the news might evolve in the future, and have had a lot of fun engaging with the students in that, in different focus groups, and learning about the types of news that people would actually want to consume. And I don't know about all of you, but from what I learned in this research is that it should be more lighthearted stories when the news is that close. And if you're going to be experiencing the news and it's right around you, we learned that definitely it's not the place to do something that's like hard-hitting news where there's maybe natural disaster or in the middle of a conflict or things like that. So we learned, because the medium of 360-degree journalism is so powerful, have to be really conscious and ethical about the stories we choose to tell in that way. So the photo you see in this slide here is students that are interviewing a representative, and for this photo, it's a criminal justice student who's getting interviewed. And so they are the representative for the police. And what happens on the college campus is that we get all the journalism students together, the policing students, we get paramedics, you can see some of them in the background here, we get nurses, and what we do is have a mock disaster. And at least what we are doing before COVID is we're getting all these students together, and we'd set up like a fake accident, something that would be where the students are landing upon a scene and then trying to figure out what happened. So from a journalism perspective, they'd be interviewing people like you see here. They'd be talking to as many people as they could. What happened? Can you tell me what unfolded today? Then they would be talking to any other witnesses. We'd actually have a hospital set up on the second floor of the college where students would be carted from an ambulance that the students would be working, all the paramedic students, load up these students into this hospital. They'd be treated by the nurses, and then the criminal justice students would be interviewing and talking to people and trying to figure out from their perspective how things unfolded. So it's an amazing day, very fulfilling. We look forward to hosting these mock disasters again in the near future, but really great chance for the students in this program to learn some of their skills just on the fly. And it's pretty fulfilling to see how they engage on those days. But that's the nice thing about our program. In a span of 2 years, they get all the skills they need. They have a laptop, they have a recorder, they have a camera, so they could really start their own media business right after they graduate, or they're ready to join television stations, radio stations, newspapers, online media across Canada and wherever they'd like to work in the world. And so we get them ready for industry, and we really make sure that they are ready in all of these different formats. So with Adobe InDesign, they need to learn how to lay out and do graphic design so that they have that really good sense of style if they're looking at public relations or any of the creative communication industry. So that's a little bit about our program. Very exciting. I could talk about it for a long time, but I'll leave it there. So From a journalism perspective, this is kind of where we reflect on this past year. And I know we've been talking about these issues probably ad nauseum. So looking at here, some of the big topics of 2021. So the idea of vaccines and vaccinations and the impact that has on the healthcare system. The idea of freedom and what that means has come up a lot, and they've been hot button topics. So very interesting about how that's all unfolded. And politics, we've had, yes, our federal election. Now, for those of us who are in Lethbridge, we have a municipal election, and the results we should find out pretty shortly. The official day for voting is next Monday, but there's been a lot of advanced polling, and that's been really interesting. So through all of these very intense topics of 2020 and 2021, it's created a lot of division and a lot of people taking very strong sides about what's unfolding around us. And so if you look at any of these topics, there's a lot of strong feelings around them. And so if you think from a journalist perspective, you have to be very careful about how you present information to your public. And you have to, again, as I mentioned before, ensure that you're very balanced in how you present your information. You have to make sure that if there's any information that is erroneous or that has errors in it, that you are making sure that as a journalist, you are fact checking and making sure if somebody is saying something that you check that back against the information that's been presented, and ensuring that you're not going to be providing information that's misleading or that is not true. So just taking a step further. So when you think of these topics, they usually have a pretty big trigger effect. So you may feel one of these or more of these feelings. So on the positive side, you may feel happy, supported, loved, and taken care of by your family, your neighborhood, your community, your professionals, and your government. So again, thinking back, vaccines, you'd be thinking, yes, I believe in the science. I trust the vaccines that they will be able to get us out of this pandemic. It is going to be the way to get us out. And so you have that trust in science. You have that trust the vaccines will get us there. And you trust our healthcare system because there's so many people that are trying to save so many people's lives all over the world. And in Alberta alone, even Lethbridge, we have our intensive care units, our ICUs that are at capacity or very close. And it's very scary. And so we want to do the best to protect those in our community, and we're thinking about those things. So that's one way that people are looking at the news. But then also we can't ignore that at the same time, there's been a lot of negative feelings towards the media. There's a lot of negative feelings towards government about the decisions that are being made about vaccination mandates, mask mandates. There's some elements of distrust that have been creeping up. There's been a lot of information that's been circulated on social media, and people have been grasping onto these different things. And some people have had a lot of fear, a lot of distrust about these different organizations, whether it's the government, whether it's healthcare, whether it's the people reporting on the news, the journalists who are trying to do their job. And there's a lot of fear and uncertainty about the future. And looking again back at these topics, you can come at these topics from a totally different angle and have a totally different way that you're shaping your worldview. And so again, journalism and the media, this is why it's so exciting to be instructing in this area, because there's such an important responsibility for journalists to get the information correct and for them to be sharing that information with a wide audience so that it can be interpreted and understood in a really good way that people are confident that they're making the best decisions to move forward. And so those are a couple of things. And I just want to make sure that I give a pretty good idea. So looking at those, either the positive way to look at the news or the negative way, you can see how your worldview can be shaped basically even on how you're raised, the community, the country, wherever you live in the world. You're going to have a different feeling about all of those topics. And that happens with any topic that's being presented to us on a daily basis. All right. So here's my plug for Spider-Man. I don't know if any of you enjoy this or not, but it's a cartoon that I grew up with. And Spider-Man, there's a great quote. And Peter Parker says, "With great power comes great responsibility." And he learned that from some of the people that brought him up. And so I think as journalists, that's definitely the role that we need to consider, and thinking about how important it is that you have a lot of power when you're a journalist, that you're sharing a message with a wide audience. So you have to make sure that you present the information, that it's factual, that it's correct, that there's some balance to it. But again, if you have, it really depends on the people that you're speaking with. Some of them have radically different views. And so to have that balance in the story, you have to make sure that you're backing it up with facts and backing it up with trusted sources. And so that's what we talk about as journalists. So let's move along here. Next one. Here's another thing. So journalists have a role to play, and then also the public has a role to play. And this is what we try to also encourage in our students. So we know that they're going to go into this industry, whether it's for communications industry, like for example, Lethbridge College has a representative that puts out press releases and shares that information on behalf of the college. There's a lot of organizations, even the Southern Alberta Ethnic Association, they would have somebody who's communicating out the messages for their organization. City of Lethbridge, any organization now, they have these spokespeople, their communications team. Our grads are usually filling one of these roles as either journalists or public relations or communications professionals. So part of this responsibility when we're consuming the news then falls to the public, and critical thinking is an essential thing that we try to instill in our students, but also that we hope it carries on with a ripple effect out into the community. So looking at something we call the CRAP test. I know it's a hilarious name, and the librarians at the Lethbridge College, so the Buchanan Library, we get them to come in and they talk about this great idea of how you can dissect information and really break it down in a critical way that you know that you're getting the best information possibly out there. And so a lot of our students, they don't use books anymore. They're relying on the internet and only the internet to get their source of information. And so this is why we encourage them as much as possible to go talk to actual real people. Go talk to the professionals, go talk to the people and see how are they actually feeling about this information. And so even as the public, we have a responsibility when we are consuming the news to look at how this information is impacting our lives and how we can make sense of it. So this CRAP test, you break it down here, it's an acronym. So currency, you can read it all here. So the timeliness of the information, making sure that the information that you're receiving is very current, that is come out within the last day or two, that it's up to date, that the information has been fact checked, that again, ideally the information is within the last month. So the news is changing so much every day. The news cycle is changing and speeding up all the time. I live on Twitter, where a lot of journalists like to hang out just because that's where a lot of breaking news can be unveiled. So that's the currency aspect of this critical thinking. Next, under R is the relevance. How does this information fit your needs? So does this make sense to you? Does it reflect your worldview and what you think? And that's why when we look at the media and how they present information, if they've done a really good job of balancing it, then they have at least two people that they've talked to that are sharing their perspectives, and you look about how does this fit? And so you think about that, and if the reporter has done a really good job and they've provided balanced information to the public, then you can reflect that information and say, okay, of these two perspectives, and hopefully the media has done more, but of these two perspectives, which one really reflects me? And so by the end of that article, it's not that the journalists or the media is trying to tell you what to think, but hopefully, and this is the way that I look at respected news organizations, that you can make a decision for yourself about what this information means to you. So that's under R. Under authority, again, the source of the information. Does it come from a professional? Does it come from a doctor? Does it come from a president of an organization? Or does it come from somebody off the street? You have to think about, where's this information coming from? And a lot of the times the students are talking to people that they ran into on the street. So it's just like, hey, Joe Smith on the street, how do you feel about this story? How does this reflect what you're thinking about the world? So you get these, they're called streeters, and you get all these different aspects of just people walking by them on the street. So talking to multiple people, getting their different perspectives. But again, when you look at this information and you put together a news story, who are these people that they're talking to? Are they credible people? Are they working for an organization? Maybe does that organization have some kind of agenda? You can think about that. So when you critically think of this information and where it's coming from, making sure that you do trust the source of that information. So that's looking at the authority. Accuracy is next. So the reliability and correctness of the information. Again, if you look at this information and you can find factual, credible information that backs up some of these things. So scientific evidence, whether it is credible information, for example, from a police organization or from your municipality, if it's, for example, the city of Lethbridge or the government of Alberta or the government of Canada or any government, can you trust that information coming from them? And usually, for the most part, you can. But again, to think very critically in that information and how you assess that. So that's the accuracy. And then the purpose. Why does this information exist? And you think about that, and how does that reflect back on who is talking? Why is this information being presented? Why is it important right now? So these are all these lenses that we need to think about when we look at the news. And if we can all be critically thinking about that, it can really help in what we think about the news that's presented to us. So taking this a step further, this is kind of a nice image here that shows multiple different news organizations. And I tell my students to do this as well. So when they hear a story that's being presented by the media, so for example, looking at the top of the screen, CTV, you hear a story that's presented by CTV and you hear that information, and let's say it's talking about maybe the latest bylaw for the city of Lethbridge, whatever it is, that information is presented from CTV. That story is put together, you watch that story. Great, you critically analyze it and make sense of it. Does that reflect my worldview? Does that make sense to me based on what's going on in the world? Excellent. So you take in that information, you dissect it, and you think about what that means for you. What needs to happen more, and I don't think that we do this enough, is we should look at multiple different media organizations to get a really strong understanding so that there's multiple perspectives being presented, many different viewpoints, many different cultures represented. That's important too, not always going back to the same people time and time again to ask them how they feel about the information. But so this is what I really like, and this is taking critical thinking a step further. So you watched your news story on CTV. Next, check out that same story from Global News or The Guardian, another great news organization I trust out of the United Kingdom, out of England. You look at how they presented the information. Then you can look at maybe from CBC's perspective. And there's many other media organizations that are out there. And these are just some of them right now. So there's a lot that are like television stations. CBC and The Guardian have a lot of online news stories. So does Global, so does CTV. There's also the numerous radio stations that we have in our community. And we have a lot of great radio stations. So you think about CGOC, you think about B93, C95, you think about Rock 106, you think about all these different radio stations, all of these different media outlets, they're all presenting this information. If we've done a really good job in understanding information that comes to us every day, we look at it from multiple different news organizations to make sure that you're getting multiple different perspectives. And there's a news organization that I really love right now, and they're taking things a step further, and they're called the Narwhal. and they're based out of BC. And what's really interesting is that they do long form journalism. And this is a lot to do with why I love print and online journalism so much, is it allows you to do a lot of more in-depth or long form. So that just means longer stories where you get the context, you get multiple perspectives. So for the most part, when you're talking about radio stations or television stations, and it's no slight to them, it's just kind of the medium and the format that they're being presented in, you can get stories that are 30 seconds long, 2 minutes long, but really that is the amount of time that they dedicate to a story. What I like about online and printed journalism is that you can have longer stories that can have multiple perspectives. And that's what the Narwhal, I think, is doing really good right now. And they have that luxury because that's kind of the model that they built from the ground up. And so they have sometimes as many as 10 different people from 10 different perspectives quoted on one story. And I really like that because it allows you to sit and think with that information a little bit further than a black and white kind of perspective. And so thinking critically involves multiple viewpoints. And I think this is one way that would really benefit. So there's that. And so I wanted to reference this article from Hootsuite. And for those of you who don't know what or who, sound like an owl myself, what Hootsuite is, it is a social media kind of organization platform that helps you send out social media from Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and you can manage it to be kind of like programmed like our VCRs used to be, or programmed like your favorite TV shows, so that you can send out these social media bytes, whether it's photos, whether it's news, information, and you can schedule that information over the course of the day. Hootsuite put together this article and it was written by Simon Kemp. And the title of this article was 500 million users joined social in the last year and other facts. So this is what they presented. Look at all this information. So in July, this is looking at the percentage of worldwide survey respondents who say they use each medium to access news content. So the green globe on the far left, this is how people get their information through online media, which includes social media. 82% here, television, about 64%, social media, so strictly social media, including messenger and how people are communicating through social media, 56%, print media, 24%, broadcast radio, so through radio stations, it's 26%. So you can see, even in the last 10 years of me teaching journalism at Lethbridge College, how the media has evolved so much. And since I started writing for newspapers back in 2001, things have shifted even more in the last 20 years. Newspapers used to be the dominant source of where people were getting information. And then things shifted and a lot of attention was then put on television. Now with Netflix and different streaming services, people are cutting their cable and they are not gravitating to those television stations as much as they used to. But you can still see this is kind of the rollout of how people are getting their information. And this is really interesting and important to think about, again, what people are thinking about the news, the trust that is involved in the news, and where you're getting information. If you're only getting your information from social media, that's a big problem because there is a lot of things that are being shared on social media that are not true. There's no fact checking with some people who just share information. Sometimes they're repeating or sharing additional information that's not true in the first place, so they're repeating a lie. And you can see how this snowball can build and build and build and get into a lot of people's minds that, oh, I saw it on social media, it must be true. So that is one thing that we try to encourage, at least with our students, to think critically and say, you know, just because you saw it on Facebook does not mean you should trust it. Where did that information come from? Do you trust that source? Can you actually back up that information? Or is it just something that was shared without any common thought about how that information might impact the people reading it? So taking a step further here, and then looking at the different social media platforms and looking how they're being used as a strict way of news. So Facebook, that's the dominant source here. 44% are treating Facebook like it's a news organization. And I strongly caution against that. I think that's very, very dangerous. I think, again, just like I've said, if you use social media too much, you start to just be kind of sheltered from the rest of the world. It's good to kind of step away from our social media platforms and go to trusted news organizations that are doing a really good job in presenting the information. Look at YouTube, it's 29%, WhatsApp, 23%, Instagram, 15%, Twitter, 13%. You have Messenger, TikTok, LinkedIn, Snapchat, all these different forms where people are treating these social media platforms as news. And so just to step back from that and to make sure that we always reflect on where this information is coming from. I personally have shut down my Facebook account because I was getting frustrated with the amount of fake information and misinformation that was being shared with me on a daily basis. It was just too overwhelming. I thought there must be a better way to connect with my friends than through this platform that was just making me angry on almost a daily basis. So I don't have a Facebook account. I don't have an Instagram account. I look at Twitter and I look at LinkedIn. That's where I get my information, but I also look at news sources on a daily basis, whether it's on my phone or on my television screen. So it's just really interesting how that information is broken down. So that is really my talk in a nutshell. And I'd be happy to answer any questions if there is time for questions. There's my email. I'd be happy to chat with any of you. I even provided my cell phone number. I'd be happy to speak with you more about this topic. It's something I'm very passionate about. And I really thank you for taking the time today to participate in this great panel of a lot of great speakers. And I just feel very honored to have been asked. So thank you again to all the organizers of this great afternoon, and really appreciate your time. So I'll look at the chat and I'll mute my microphone, but if you can let me know if I can answer some questions, I'd be happy to do so.
Well, the first one here says, how can it be ensured that the news reports are written from a place of clarity and not from a conditioned bias?
It's a great question. So it's a really good question. And thank you for asking that, Nathan.
Yeah, it says to go deeper, how have you ensured that the material you are teaching isn't skewed by conditioned bias?
Sure, yeah, definitely. So what happens in the classroom, at least, we have a lot of engaging discussions with students. They present multiple different perspectives on topics, and we encourage all of those topics to be presented. So when you ask, how can we ensure that the news reports are written from a place of clarity? There's two news organizations that I'm going to pick on. One is Canadian and one is American. And I do not trust these news organizations. And I'm sorry for any of those who do trust these organizations. In the United States, Fox News is an organization that I do not trust because they do not do a really good job of balancing the information that they share with their public. They have a really strong bias and they have a really strong agenda that they push. And I think it has been dangerous, especially over the last 4 years with the previous president that was in the United States. I won't mention who that is. We all know who that is. But Fox gave a platform to a lot of misinformation, and it was really dangerous. In Canada, we have a similar news organization that I do not trust, and it's called The Rebel. And it's hosted by somebody called Ezra Levant. And he is another person that does not do a good job of providing balanced information to the public. Two organizations that I think are very dangerous to the public, for those people who look at news organizations and think they can trust all of them, those are two that I would not trust because they present their agenda, and that's very dangerous. So I think, Nathan, to answer your question more, how can we ensure that news reports are written from a place of clarity? To make sure that the information you're getting has that balance in it, that it has multiple perspectives that are being presented. So that way it doesn't look like there is a bias that's being presented, and journalists should never present their opinion in a story. That is a really dangerous thing that should be separated. No opinion presented. So instead, let the people that they interview present their opinions, and then you report the facts. That's your role as a journalist. So hopefully that answers those questions that you have, Nathan, and thank you so much for those. And I'll wait for another question here. It looks like there's a couple more in the chat. maybe I'll just read this one out. So Chitty has a question here. It says, in the face of the uncertainties and fears of the current pandemic, does current media outlets find a somewhat parallel pressure to expunge or deviate from the crap test to keep pace with the intensity of fake news? Yeah, I think there definitely is that pressure to make sure that the media present information that doesn't have that bias, and that make sure that to make sure that those fears are being explained, and that maybe that, for example, with the vaccine hesitancy and why people are not getting their vaccine, there's many different reasons why people are hesitant about getting the vaccine, and there's many different ways. So as long as the media organization respects those viewpoints and they can address those fears in a really compassionate and empathetic way, I think that they've done a really good job of making sure they go through that same credibility, reliability, accurate, all of those elements of that CRAP acronym to make sure that they are doing a really good job of presenting balanced information to the public. So thank you so much. That's a really good question. But yes, that's the pressure that we put on our students. That's the hope that when they graduate from their program, they're being very responsible in how they move forward in their careers and presenting that information to the public. So thank you so much to everybody for your questions. And I think we're probably out of time for the next speaker, so I'm going to mute myself.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hodgson.